My name is Lila Harrington, and I'm 31. If you ask my parents, they'd tell you Thanksgiving is sacred, an unshakable family ritual, where smiles are mandatory and every photo tells a story of perfect togetherness. To me, it has always felt more like a play I'm forced to act in, one where the audience knows my lines better than I do. Every year, I show up, I perform, and I leave feeling smaller than when I arrived. This year was no different. The late afternoon sunlight hit the driveway in a burnt orange haze, the kind of light that makes every corner look both warm and cold at the same time. I parked my car carefully, my hands gripping the box of the cherry pie I had stayed up late baking. I didn't choose the easy route this time. I wanted to do something real, something they couldn't ignore. But as soon as I rang the bell, I already knew they would. Mom opened the door before I could take a step back. She was wearing lipstick that didn't match the rest of her outfit, and a cardigan that had clearly seen better days. "Lila, my girl," she said, hugging me but already eyeing the pie. "Where should I put this?" she asked, snatching the box from my hands and spinning toward the kitchen. I followed silently, the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoing behind me. The living room was alive with noise. Dad was perched in his recliner, beer in hand, eyes glued to the football game. My brother, Tyler, hadn't arrived yet. He never came on time, but his presence loomed anyway. His wife, Claire, had already staked her claim in the corner sofa, her designer bag beside her, and a store-bought pecan pie balanced on her lap like a trophy. "Ah, pie," Mom cooed, gently placing it in the center of the counter. My cherry pie was tucked behind a stack of bowls, half hidden as if it were an afterthought. I didn't expect her to praise it. It wasn't about that. I wanted them to notice me. Just once. Dinner began with all the usual pretenses. The turkey was dry, the stuffing over-seasoned, and the mashed potatoes lumpy. Claire asked about my job in a way that was both curious and condescending. "Still doing that remote thing? Must be nice to work from home." Her eyebrows lifted like she was giving me permission to live. I forced a polite smile. My remote job was exhausting, managing a team scattered across 3 continents, but I didn't explain. Why? Because explanations didn't matter here. Nothing I said ever mattered. Dad didn't look up from his game, but his smirk found me anyway. That same smirk he had perfected over decades. The one that said, "Still the family disappointment, huh?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Words were unnecessary. That smirk spoke louder than anything anyone could say. Mom didn't intervene. She only laughed lightly, a nervous laugh that betrayed nothing. I realized then she had learned the art of silent approval, never rocking the boat, letting Dad carry the judgment. Tyler finally arrived, ushering Claire and their son, Max, through the door. Max ran straight to the pile of new toys Mom had laid out, ignoring me completely. I watched him, my chest tightening. This wasn't about a toy or a pie. It was about the invisible line that separated me from them. I was expected to entertain, to support, to provide, but never to matter. When conversation turned to travel, I mentioned a recent weekend trip to the mountains. "Oh, that must have been nice," Claire said, tilting her head in a way that suggested I should be grateful to have had the opportunity, even though she spent her vacations in Europe every summer. Dad nodded along, smirk still faint but lingering, as if reminding me silently that no amount of adventure would ever change my place in this family. By the time dessert arrived, my pie sat untouched. Claire's pecan pie vanished in minutes, while my cherry pie looked like a forgotten relic. Dad's eyes met mine briefly, lingering on the uneaten pie and then on me. "Still the family let down," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. The fork fell from my hand. I could feel my face heat, but I forced myself to remain seated, silent. If I reacted, I would look weak. If I didn't, I would look cold. Either way, I would lose. After dinner, I helped clear the table quietly. Mom tried to thank me, but it sounded rehearsed, like she was apologizing for saying nothing earlier. Tyler and Claire left soon after, pulling Max along, Their goodbyes polite but empty. Dad returned to his chair, the game volume rising. Mom glanced at me briefly, then followed him back to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer, staring at the pie I had made with care, realizing something that hit colder than the winter wind outside. No matter how hard I tried, nothing I did mattered here. I finally turned and left, pie uneaten, head held high. Outside, the crisp air hit my face. I felt shaking, not with anger, but with clarity. I had spent my whole life performing, pretending to be grateful for small scraps of attention, hoping for validation that would never come. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. That night, back in my apartment, I set the cherry pie on my counter, cut a slice, and tasted it. Sweet, firm, perfect, just like me. I realized then that my value wasn't defined by their smirks, their silence, or their approval. It was defined by me, and by the choices I was about to make. The next morning, I woke up to the quiet hum of my apartment. No laughter, no smirks, no reminders of where I supposedly belonged in the family hierarchy. It felt foreign, like stepping into a room that wasn't designed to judge me. I made coffee and looked out the window at the city streets below, watching people walk by, lost in their own routines. For the first time, I thought about what I actually owed anyone in my life. Thanksgiving had always been a mirror, a distorted one. I'd arrived full of care, full of effort, and walked out feeling small, invisible, like nothing I did could ever change how my parents saw me. But yesterday, the smirk had struck differently. Dad didn't need words. His expression cut deeper than anything he had said in years. And Mom's silence, it wasn't neutrality. It was collusion. She had let him speak for both of them. I remembered the pie on the counter, ignored in favor of Claire's store-bought one. That was it in microcosm. Every sacrifice I had made, every gesture of goodwill, every late-night phone call or financial favor, had been taken for granted. Every time I gave, I was expected to continue giving, and never to question, never to receive. It wasn't love. It wasn't appreciation. It was utility. I sank into the couch, notebook in hand, and started writing. Not a list of complaints, not a passive-aggressive diary entry, but a map of reality. Every time I had bent over backward, what had I received in return? A smirk, silence, the faintest nod of acknowledgement at best. Nothing that said I mattered beyond what I provided. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel anger, not the fiery, explosive kind, but sharp and precise, like a scalpel cutting away illusions. I thought about Tyler and Claire living in my city, in my building, for nearly 4 years, paying far less than what their apartment was worth. I'd always justified it. Family, temporary help, until they got on their feet. But every month that passed, their gratitude had faded into expectation. Every gentle reminder I tried to make about fairness or rent adjustments was dismissed, deflected, or spun into guilt. They were comfortable, empowered, and entitled, and I was invisible until they needed me again. I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. The city lights blurred behind me, gold and indifferent. For years, I had tried to make peace with the role they had cast me in. The dutiful daughter, the silent supporter, the one who never disrupted family equilibrium. But I realized yesterday at that Thanksgiving table that peace had been an illusion. It wasn't love or respect. They only liked me when I was useful. The thought solidified into something heavier, colder, and sharper. Enough was enough. My hands rested on the notebook as if they were holding a steering wheel. I could navigate this now. I didn't have to endure their judgments or their manipulations any longer. I didn't owe them compliance, approval, or emotional labor. I owed them boundaries. I owed myself freedom. I began to plan. Not a battle plan in the conventional sense. Not a confrontation yet, but a structure. What needed to change? First, the financial boundaries. Tyler and Claire were living at a fraction of their market rate for my property. It had started as temporary kindness, but it had become exploitation. Second, my emotional boundaries. I would no longer allow dad's smirks or mom's silence to define my self-worth. Third, my social boundaries. No more pretending that their selective kindness or performative apologies mattered. Their perception of me would no longer dictate my peace. I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly as I wrote the words. No more favors. They were simple, clean, definitive. I read them aloud in my apartment, letting the phrase resonate in the space that had always belonged solely to me. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. For the first time, I was not reacting. I was deciding. Later that day, I took a quiet walk to the local park. The crisp autumn air wrapped around me as the leaves crunched beneath my feet. Families strolled past, children laughing, couples holding hands. I watched them, detached, imagining what it would feel like to exist without expectation, without performance, without judgment. That vision of peace, of agency, felt possible, tangible. It was like tasting the first sip of coffee after a sleepless night, bitter and invigorating all at once. By evening, I had drafted a few messages in my phone's notes app. Not to send, just to clarify my thoughts. They were brief, firm, unemotional. Every phrase was a step away from the old me, the one who silently absorbed injustice to keep the peace. Market rent effective next month. All repairs and maintenance are responsibility of tenants. Boundaries are non-negotiable. I reread the messages and realized something profound. I didn't need their approval to act. I didn't need their understanding. I didn't need their love. I only needed my own clarity and courage. And for the first time, I felt free. As I returned home, the last light of the sun fading behind the city skyline, I made a silent promise. This Thanksgiving, the smirk, the silence, the judgment, it wouldn't break me. It would be the moment that finally taught me how to stop performing for a family that never saw me. The next step would be decisive, and I would act with precision. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming what was mine. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of necessity. For the first time, I felt something that had eluded me for years. Control over my life, and over how I was treated. The morning after my walk, I woke with a determination I hadn't felt in years. The Thanksgiving smirk, mom's silence, Tyler and Claire's entitlement, it all crystallized into one undeniable truth. I was done being the invisible caretaker, the family scapegoat, the default doormat. I poured coffee and sat at my kitchen table, laptop open. I had drafted the notices the night before. Rent adjustments, clear expectations for the apartment, and firm timelines. Every word was deliberate. No room for excuses, guilt, or argument. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I thought about how many times I had tried to reason with Tyler or Claire in the past. Emails ignored, deflections mastered, guilt trips activated. Not this time. This time, I would act with authority, not apology. By late morning, I had printed official-looking letters. One for Tyler, one for Claire, both stating the new rent and the deadlines for compliance. I had even included a reminder that the apartment was my property and that no formal lease existed. Legally, they were guests. I felt a strange calm as I stuffed the envelopes and grabbed my coat. This wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, measured and precise. When I arrived at the building, my stomach tightened for a moment. I wasn't naive. I expected resistance, maybe even drama. I knocked lightly. But Claire opened the door immediately, mascara smudged, hair messy, Max tucked under one arm. Her eyes flicked to the envelopes in my hand. "Lila, what's this?" she asked, trying to sound calm, though her voice was shaky. I handed it to her. "Read it," I said simply. No smile, no explanation, just the authority I hadn't allowed myself to claim in years. Her lips pressed together as she scanned the notice. Her face paled slightly, and Max clutched at her leg. "You can't. This isn't fair," she said, voice rising. "We've been living here, on my property." I interrupted evenly. "At a fraction of market value. Temporarily, As a favor. That favor ends now. She swallowed, trying to find words, but I didn't give her any. This wasn't a negotiation. I had been clear in my mind for weeks. No justification, no debate, no guilt manipulation. She had weaponized my generosity too many times. It stopped today. Tyler arrived a few minutes later, his face already red before he opened his mouth. Lila, what are you doing? You can't just. Yes, I can, I said calmly. There's no lease. You've been guests for years. This notice is lawful, clear, and final. You have 10 days to pay the new rent or vacate. He laughed, short and sharp, the kind of laugh people use to mask panic. You've lost your mind. You think money is going to fix everything. I set my coffee down on the counter and met his eyes. It's not about money. It's about respect. Something you've never given me. His jaw tightened. Respect? From you. You think you're better than us now. I don't think, I said, voice even. I know. For 4 years, I provided, excused, and endured. I'm done. You need to take care of yourselves, not rely on me for comfort, for rent, for life. Claire stepped forward, holding Max tightly. Levi, he's just a kid. You can't do this. I softened slightly, but only in tone, not in intent. Max's well-being isn't in question. You're his parents. You provide for him. That's your job, not mine. Tyler glared at me, fists clenched. You'll regret this. You'll ruin everything between us. I let him talk while I remained composed. This was a familiar tactic. Loud threats, emotional manipulation, attempts to make me feel guilty. I had endured it countless times. Not today. If I did nothing, I said quietly, I'd be enabling a pattern that ends with you disregarding my boundaries every single time. This isn't about anger, Tyler. This is about action. You have a choice. Respect the rules or leave. Claire's eyes darted to the floor, and I could see her frustration crack into panic. Max clung to her, but even he couldn't erase the clarity of the moment. My resolve was unmistakable. I left them staring at the envelopes, at the reality I had finally imposed. No screaming, no tears, just certainty. On the way home, I felt a strange relief. The tension that had lived in my chest for years, the one that tightened every time I smiled through criticism or ignored slight, was loosening. By nightfall, texts and calls started coming in. Tyler tried his usual tactic, guilt and panic through phone calls. Lila, we'll be homeless. You can't do this before the holidays. It's cruel. I let the first ring go to voicemail. The second, I knew what they were trying to do. Provoke an emotional response. But I didn't answer until I was calm, measured. You have 10 days. I said when I finally picked up. This is final. But Lila. Tyler began, but I cut him off. No negotiations. You have 10 days to respect my rules or leave. That's it. Silence followed. Not the awkward, uncomfortable kind. A silence filled with understanding. Not theirs, but mine. They realized I wasn't bluffing, that I had changed. After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out over the city. It was quiet, peaceful, the first real peace I had known in a long time. I reflected on the Thanksgiving smirk, Mom's enabling silence, the endless years of playing my assigned role, and I smiled faintly. For the first time, I wasn't performing for anyone. The next steps were clear. Monitor the eviction, ensure compliance, and reclaim my space. I had no illusions about the drama that might follow, but I didn't need to. I had clarity, boundaries, and resolve. That night, as I locked my apartment door, I whispered to myself, they can try to challenge me, manipulate me, or even scare me, but I'm done being the family letdown. I finally know my worth. The morning after I delivered the notices, the apartment felt unusually quiet. Too quiet, the kind of silence that signals something brewing beneath the surface. I poured coffee and tried to ignore the small pit forming in my stomach. I had done what I had to do, yet I knew this wouldn't be easy. Tyler and Claire were not used to boundaries. especially ones that challenged the narrative they had always relied on, that I was weak, compliant, and easily manipulated. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. First, it was Tyler. The calls came in rapid succession, one after another, each more desperate than the last. "Lila, please, don't make this about money. Max can't handle this," he yelled on the third call. I ignored it. I wasn't going to argue or justify my decisions. Then came Claire's texts. Long, emotional messages designed to make me feel guilty. "You're breaking up our family. This isn't about you. We're struggling." I read the texts calmly, then deleted them. I didn't respond. Not yet. Reacting emotionally was exactly what they wanted. They were trying to pull me back into the old pattern, to remind me that I was the family disappointment who should give in to keep the peace. But the truth was, I wasn't that person anymore. That version of me had expired. By late afternoon, the situation escalated. Claire, in a desperate bid for sympathy, had posted a long message on social media. She framed me as the villain, the heartless aunt, the greedy sister, the one who cared more about money than family. There was even a photo of Max, looking solemn and innocent, which she used to tug at the hearts of strangers. Thousands of people liked and commented, all echoing her narrative. My chest tightened for a moment as I scrolled through the post, but I quickly closed it. This was expected, and I would not let it control me. Instead, I focused on the logistics. Movers had been booked in case they refused to comply, and I had arranged for a lawyer to be on standby. I wasn't just defending my property, I was protecting my peace of mind, my boundaries, and my autonomy. Every precaution I took reinforced a lesson I had learned over the years. Family does not automatically grant respect. You must claim it. That evening, I received a knock at my door. I wasn't surprised. It was Claire. Her mascara was streaked, and Max clung to her like a lifeline. She tried to appeal to me, with pleading eyes, her voice trembling. "It's a misunderstanding, Lila. I didn't mean to make it look like you're cruel. Please, you have to reconsider. Max is just a child." I looked at her carefully. This wasn't about Max. This was about control. I spoke slowly, firmly. "Claire, you made your choice. You created this story online, manipulated others with Max's image, and ignored the boundaries I set for years. I will not be pulled into guilt or fear. You have 10 days, and that is final." Her shoulders slumped, and I could see her panic flicker into helplessness. Tyler appeared in the doorway behind her, face red with frustration. "Lila, this is insane. You're making a huge mistake. People will think you're cruel. Mom and Dad will never forgive this." I met his gaze evenly. "You've confused convenience and entitlement with forgiveness. I will not compromise my boundaries, my property, or my peace for your comfort. If you're willing to respect that, you have 10 days. If not, you leave." Tyler's expression darkened, and he muttered something under his breath. Claire started crying quietly, Max hiding behind her leg. For a moment, I almost felt a pang of guilt, but I recognized it immediately and pushed it away. This wasn't cruelty. It was justice and self-preservation. The next morning, the local news wasn't actually involved, but it felt like it. My phone started ringing with calls and messages from distant relatives, neighbors, even coworkers. "Lila, is it true? You're evicting your own family." People I hadn't spoken to in years weighed in with their opinions, all echoing Claire's online narrative. It was exhausting and invasive, but I didn't reply. I didn't have to explain my actions to anyone. My truth didn't need an audience, it just needed to be enacted. Then came the subtle intimidation. Someone had scratched the word thief into my mailbox, deep and deliberate, a threat in black ink. I photographed it, forwarded it to my lawyer, and called the police. I didn't panic. I didn't react. This was part of the process. Proof of escalation from people who had never respected my boundaries before. By mid-afternoon, movers arrived. Tyler and Claire had begun packing haphazardly, slamming doors and tossing possessions into boxes. Max watched silently, unsure of what was happening, and I felt a brief pang in my chest. But even then, I reminded myself that their drama was not my responsibility. They had created this storm. I was merely enforcing the boundaries I had long been denied. As the movers loaded the last boxes, Tyler glared at me. "This isn't over. You'll regret this," he spat. I smiled faintly, calm. Regret isn't mine to feel. Peace is. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the apartment was empty. Walls scuffed, counters scratched, carpet worn, but mine again. I walked through it, taking in the stillness. The chaos had been cleared, leaving only the space I had fought for, the space I had earned. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like indifferent stars. I thought about the smirk, the silence, the countless Thanksgiving dinners I had endured, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. They could post, manipulate, lie, or cry. They could try to sway others with stories or images. But I had reclaimed my space, my peace, and my dignity. And for the first time, I didn't have to perform for anyone. I wasn't the family disappointment. I was Lila Harrington, and I was finally free. The day after the apartment was finally emptied, I woke to a silence I hadn't experienced in years. No frantic calls, no messages pleading for reconsideration, no smirks or passive-aggressive emails. Just quiet. It was almost disorienting at first, like stepping into a room I didn't recognize. But as I sipped my morning coffee and gazed out the window at the awakening city, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. Peace. Of course, the family fallout had only just begun. By midday, texts and emails were flooding in. From distant relatives, neighbors, even old classmates. Everyone wanted an opinion, a story, a verdict. "Lila, are you really evicting your family? What about Max? You can't just do that before the holidays." It was exhausting, intrusive, and mostly irrelevant. I didn't reply. Their perception didn't define me. My truth was my own, enacted, undeniable, and final. That evening, my phone buzzed with another call. It was Mom. My chest tightened as I debated whether to answer. The rational part of me said yes. The protective part said no. I let it ring once, twice, then finally picked up. "Hello," I said, calm. "Lila, we need to talk." Mom's voice wavered slightly, trying to sound light but failing. "Tyler and Claire, you went too far. You're being cruel." I exhaled slowly. "Mom, I've been trying to be reasonable for years. I've helped them financially, emotionally, and socially, while being treated like I owed them my life. That ends now." There was silence on the line. Then Mom spoke, softer this time. "They're your family." I interrupted, firm but steady. "Family isn't defined by convenience or selective love. They're my family by blood, yes, but they are guests in my home by law and respect. I've enforced boundaries that should have existed long ago. I'm not cruel. I'm clear." The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing, hesitant. "But what about Max? He doesn't deserve this." "I know," I said quietly, "but Max's well-being is the responsibility of his parents, not mine. He is loved and cared for by them, not me. And that is how it should be." Mom didn't respond immediately. I ended the call calmly. No argument. No explanation. Just closure. For the first time, I wasn't apologizing for enforcing boundaries. Later that week, I began the slow process of repairing the apartment. There were scuffed walls, scratches on the hardwood, and a few broken cabinets. I paid for repairs myself. $900 for paint, carpet, and a new door. Each stroke of paint, each nail in the wall, felt symbolic. I wasn't just fixing the apartment. I was reclaiming my life, my space, and my dignity. A few days later, new tenants moved in, a young couple, polite, respectful, and grateful. They handed me a small card with a note. "Thank you for trusting us with your space. We'll take care of it." Their words, sincere and unassuming, felt like the first real validation I had received from someone who didn't expect something in return. I smiled genuinely, something I hadn't done during a family gathering in years. As I walked through the apartment that evening, I thought back to the Thanksgiving table, to the smirk, to the silence, to the ignored pie. I realized something profound. For decades, I had been performing for people who would never see me. And now, for the first time, I wasn't performing. I was living. Then came the subtle, almost humorous reminder of the chaos I had survived. My mailbox, where Tyler and Claire's nameplates still hung crooked, stared at me from the corner. I pulled it off and tossed it in the trash, listening to the clatter at the bottom. It was like punctuation, a final period at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. In the following weeks, I stayed vigilant. Tyler and Claire had tried minor acts of defiance. A misplaced key, a rushed complaint to the building manager, a few passive-aggressive comments from distant relatives. Each attempt was met with calm action or silence. I refused to be drawn back into their manipulations. Every time I caught myself wavering, I reminded myself I was no longer their caretaker, their excuse, or their family scapegoat. I was free. And then one quiet evening, I found something that made me laugh softly. A small, crayon-drawn envelope in my mailbox, and signed, just my initials on the front. Inside was a simple drawing. A tall building, 2 stick figures holding hands under a heart, labeled Aunt Lila. No words, no notes, just pure, uncomplicated truth. Max had remembered me. Not the villain his mother portrayed, but me. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. Truth doesn't need justification. It only needs to exist. Months passed. The apartment remained peaceful. Tyler and Claire had moved in with my parents, adjusting their lives without my interference. From what I heard, Tyler was selling sneakers online. Claire was working part-time at a salon. Max adjusted quietly, as children do, resilient in ways adults often underestimate. And me? I traveled, worked, and lived in the quiet, free life I had fought so hard to claim. I hadn't just reclaimed a home. I had reclaimed myself. The Thanksgiving smirk, mom's silence, the sense of being perpetually inadequate, they no longer defined me. I had boundaries, clarity, and dignity, and that, I realized, was more valuable than any pie, any praise, or any approval I could have begged for in my family. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't the family disappointment. I was Lila Harrington, living on my own terms, free of manipulation, free of guilt, and finally, unapologetically me. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. No frantic calls, no sudden visits, no manipulations or guilt-laden texts. It was the kind of silence that used to make me anxious, the silence that had always whispered that I was failing somehow. But this time, it felt like freedom, like exhaling for the first time after years of holding my breath. I spent mornings at the kitchen table, coffee steaming, letting my thoughts wander without interference. For years, every decision I made had been measured against how it would be perceived by my family. Mom, Dad, Tyler, Claire, even Max. Every vacation, every career choice, every small moment of personal joy had been weighed and found wanting in their eyes. Now I made choices for myself alone, and it felt revolutionary. The apartment finally felt like mine again. Fresh paint, new carpet, polished counters. Every corner reflected the life I had claimed back. Walking through the rooms, I realized how much energy I had wasted performing for others, bending myself into someone I was not. The walls didn't judge. The counters didn't compare me to Tyler and Claire. The apartment didn't demand gratitude for favors I had been expected to provide. It just existed, and now so did I. Then came the quietest, yet most profound moment. A letter slipped through my mailbox. No return address. No familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in childish crayon marks. A small heart in the corner. A stick figure holding another stick figure's hand. And the words, "Aunt Lila, we love you." Max had drawn this. Not Claire, not Tyler, not anyone trying to manipulate me. Just Max seeing me for who I was. My eyes stung as I taped the drawing to my fridge, a permanent reminder that truth and love are independent of approval or performance. By the end of the month, my parents reached out. Not in anger, not in praise, just acknowledgement. A text from Mom. "We should talk soon." I didn't reply immediately. I didn't need to. The past few weeks had shown me that boundaries don't mean hatred. Boundaries mean peace. And peace, once earned, isn't something I was willing to surrender lightly. I reflected on the Thanksgiving dinner, the smirk on Dad's face, the way Mom ignored me, the way Tyler and Claire had treated me as invisible until convenient. It was a painful memory, but one I no longer carried with shame. It was evidence of what I had endured and survived. I had learned that family doesn't automatically protect, respect, or value you. Sometimes, you must create that protection for yourself. Sometimes, you must define your own worth. The holidays passed quietly. No tension. No guilt trips. No attempts to undermine me. Tyler and Claire were adjusting to their new reality with my parents. Max navigating life with resilience I had always hoped he would develop. And me, I traveled, worked, and built life moments for myself that weren't contingent on approval, smiles, or social media praise. Each trip, each new city I explored, felt like a reclamation of years' lost obligation. One evening, as I stood by my apartment window, sipping a glass of wine, I looked out at the city below. The lights blinked softly in the distance, indifferent to my triumphs and failures. And yet, I felt profoundly victorious. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into the mold my family had set for me. I wasn't chasing validation or trying to meet their ever-changing expectations. I was living on my own terms, and that life, messy and imperfect, but entirely mine, was beautiful. A few months later, a friend stopped by with her own children, laughing, playful, alive. Max had sent me another drawing, this time of a tree with two birds sitting on the branches, labeled Aunt Lila and Max. I smiled and pinned it next to the first one on the fridge. These small gestures mattered far more than the endless criticism, the Thanksgiving smirk, or the manipulations I had endured. They were proof that love, when genuine, doesn't need performance or permission. And in the quiet evenings, when the city hummed beneath my window, I allowed myself one final reflection. For decades, I had been defined by others, by smirks, by silences, by expectations and disappointment. But now, I was defined by myself, my choices, my boundaries, my courage, and my clarity. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was Lila Harrington, the woman who finally stopped performing, who finally claimed her space, her dignity, and her life. For the first time, I could rest. Truly, the apartment was mine, the city was mine, my life was mine, and in that truth, I found something rare and profound. Freedom, peace, and the quiet joy of knowing my worth. The last piece of closure came unexpectedly. One evening, my parents called, this time cautiously, almost reverently. "We've been thinking," Mom began, but I smiled quietly to myself, shaking my head. I didn't need reconciliation to feel whole. I didn't need apologies to feel peace. I was whole already. I thanked them politely, let the conversation be brief, and hung up. Boundaries respected, peace maintained, life moving forward. I poured another glass of wine, stood by my window, and looked at the city that sparkled like opportunity. The lights blinked with indifferent perfection, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need to perform for anyone. Not for my parents, not for Tyler and Claire, not for social media, not for the world. I was enough, on my own terms, and that was all I needed.